Maylin walked through the brightly colored hallway of Sunshine Valley Elementary, the cheerful artwork of her kindergarten students bringing warmth to the Monday morning. At 32, she wasn't where she had imagined herself to be at this point in her life, but there was a quiet joy in her work that money couldn't buy. "Good morning, Ms. Lin," a small voice called out as tiny footsteps pattered across the classroom floor. It was Lily, always the first to arrive, her round eyes wide with excitement as she clutched a crumpled piece of paper. "What do you have there?" May asked, kneeling down despite the protest of her tired knees. She'd been up late again, working on lesson plans after spending the evening at her mother's bedside. "I drew my family," Lily said proudly, revealing a crayon masterpiece. "And look, I drew you too because Mom says teachers are like extra family." Something caught in May's throat as she accepted the drawing. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. The coastal town of Pinecrest wasn't large by any measure, just 30,000 souls nestled between mountains and sea. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. To most, May was simply the quiet kindergarten teacher who lived in the faded blue house at the end of Oak Street, the one who always smiled but rarely spoke about herself. What they didn't see was how she sat with her elderly mother every evening, carefully measuring medication doses and reading aloud from dog-eared paperbacks. They didn't know about the 3 jobs she had worked through college, or how her mother's illness had drained the modest savings they had managed to build. "Ms. Lin, can you help with the snack table?" her teaching assistant called, pulling May back to the present as more children began filtering into the classroom. The morning passed in a blur of alphabet songs, counting games, and the inevitable small crises of 5-year-old life. By lunchtime, May had resolved 2 tearful disputes over crayon ownership, bandaged 1 scraped knee, and helped create a class mural about community helpers. "You have the patience of a saint," remarked Gabriella, the 2nd-grade teacher, as they sat together in the staff room. "I don't know how you do it day after day." May smiled, warming her hands around a mug of tea she had brewed from home. Small luxuries like coffee shop visits had been cut from her budget months ago. "They're worth it," she said simply. "Every one of them." What she didn't add was that the classroom was sometimes easier than home, where bills piled up on the kitchen table, and her mother's condition seemed to worsen despite the expensive treatments. After school, while other teachers headed home to their families or out for happy hour drinks, May made her way to the Pinecrest Community Center. The aging brick building had seen better days, but it remained the beating heart of the working-class side of town, offering after-school programs, senior activities, and a food pantry that May herself had occasionally relied on during particularly tight months. "There she is," called out Hank, the center's director, a man whose white hair and wrinkled face belied his boundless energy, our volunteer of the year 3 years running. May waved away his praise. "I'm just helping with homework club today." "Nothing special." "Nothing special, she says." Hank laughed, turning to Rosa, who ran the front desk. "This woman donates 20 hours a week here, and she says it's nothing special." Rosa nodded knowingly. Some people shine so bright they don't see their own light. May felt her cheeks warm at their kind words. The truth was that the community center had been her lifeline when she first moved to Pinecrest with her mother. It was here she had found her first friends, here where she had been pointed toward the job opening at Sunshine Valley. Giving back wasn't charity, it was gratitude. The homework club was already filling with children when she arrived in the small library area. Most were from families where parents worked multiple jobs, kids who would otherwise return to empty apartments or spend hours unsupervised. "Ms. Lin, can you help me with fractions?" called out Theo, a bright 4th grader whose mother worked the late shift at the hospital. "After I check Diego's spelling list," she promised, already settling into the familiar rhythm of moving between tables, offering guidance, encouragement, and occasionally the firm redirection that some students needed. 2 hours passed quickly, and as the last child was picked up, May noticed Hank standing in the doorway, his usually cheerful face drawn with worry. "Everything okay?" she asked, gathering scattered pencils and straightening chairs. He sighed heavily. "Not really. Just got word from the city council. Our funding's being cut again, and this time they're talking about possibly selling the building." May felt something cold settle in her stomach. "They can't do that. This place is too important." "Tell that to the budget committee," Hank said, rubbing his temple. "Or better yet, Tell it to the Pinecrest Development Group. Word is they've got plans for luxury condos all along this strip. But where would everyone go? The seniors, the kids, the food pantry? Hank shrugged, his shoulders heavy with the weight of uncertainty. That's the question nobody seems interested in answering. That night, as May sat beside her sleeping mother, her mind kept returning to the community center. She thought of Theo, who had nowhere else to go after school. She thought of the senior citizens who gathered there for their only social interaction of the week. She thought of families like her own, who relied on the food pantry to make it through the end of the month. Almost without realizing it, she opened her laptop and began typing. First an email to the parents of her current and former students, then a draft of a letter to the local newspaper. By midnight, she had created a simple website outlining the center's programs and impact, with a petition demanding the city reconsider its decision. It wasn't much, but it was a start. May had never seen herself as an activist, certainly not as a leader, but some battles were too important to walk away from. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of classroom teaching by day and organizing by night. To her surprise, her quiet call to action had struck a chord. Parents from her class had spread the word, and soon local business owners from the less affluent part of town began reaching out, offering support. "You've started quite the movement," Rosa commented one afternoon, as they stuffed envelopes with flyers. "I just wrote a few emails," May protested, uncomfortable with the suggestion that she was doing anything special. Sometimes, that's all it takes, one person willing to speak up. First, what May didn't know was that her emails had reached farther than she imagined. One had been forwarded to a journalist at the regional newspaper, who wrote a piece about the threatened community center. Another had somehow found its way to the inbox of someone who rarely checked personal messages, but happened to be looking for investment opportunities in Pinecrest. Meanwhile, across town in the pristine offices of Pinecrest City Hall, the Budget Committee was meeting to finalize the sale of the community center property. Present were the mayor, various officials, and representatives from the town's wealthy families, including Victoria Powell, whose family had controlled much of the local real estate for generations. "The community center property is prime for redevelopment," the city manager was explaining, pointing to projections on a screen. "The Pinecrest Development Group's offer would bring significant tax revenue, not to mention jobs during construction." Victoria nodded approvingly, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the polished table. "It's about time we cleaned up that area. Those old buildings are an eyesore." No one mentioned the petition that had gathered over 2,000 signatures. No one spoke of the programs that would be displaced. In the gleaming city hall, with its view of the yacht harbor, the concerns of Oak Street seemed very far away. Back at the community center, May was helping Hank plan a fundraising event, something they'd never done before. But desperate times called for desperate measures. "We need to show the whole town what this place means," May insisted, despite her natural aversion to the spotlight. "Not just our regular families, but the people who never come to this side of town." Hank looked skeptical. "You think the country club crowd is going to show up here?" "Maybe not here," May admitted. "But what if we held it somewhere they would come? Make it fancy. Make it something they'd want to be seen at." It was an audacious plan for someone who owned exactly one dress nice enough for parent-teacher conferences, but May was running out of options. If saving the community center meant stepping outside her comfort zone, then that's what she would do. What she couldn't have known was that her quiet efforts had already caught the attention of someone with the power to change everything. Someone who had been watching from the shadows, evaluating the heart of the town before making his presence fully known. As May walked home that evening, the sunset painting, the modest houses of her neighborhood in gold, she had no idea that her simple life was about to collide with a world she had only ever glimpsed from afar. She was just a kindergarten teacher trying to save a place that mattered, unaware that her actions had set in motion events that would soon turn her world upside down. For now, though, she had lesson plans to finish and her mother's medication to organize. Tomorrow would be another day of alphabet songs and crayon masterpieces, of homework help and petition signatures. It was a small life in many ways, but it was rich with purpose, and that, May believed, was worth fighting for. The Grand Pinecrest Hotel stood like a gleaming lighthouse on the edge of town, its windows blazing with golden light that spilled onto the manicured gardens below. For most residents of Oak Street, the hotel existed in another world entirely, a place glimpsed only from a distance, like a castle in a fairy tale. Tonight, however, Mei Lin stood at its entrance, clutching her small beaded purse with nervous fingers. The fundraising gala for the community center had found an unexpected venue when the hotel's event manager, whose son had once been in May's kindergarten class, offered a steep discount for the ballroom. "You can do this," May whispered to herself, smoothing down the front of her dress. It was the nicest thing she owned, a navy blue cocktail dress she had purchased 3 years ago for her cousin's wedding. She had spent the afternoon carefully steaming out the wrinkles and sewing back a loose button, hoping it would be enough to help her blend in. A valet approached, hand extended for keys she didn't have. "I walked," May explained with an embarrassed smile. "It's not far from where I live." The young man looked confused but quickly recovered. "Of course, ma'am. The entrance is just ahead." Taking a deep breath, May pushed through the revolving door into a lobby that gleamed with marble and crystal. She had been inside the hotel only once before, when a student's wealthy grandparents had invited her for tea to discuss their grandson's progress. Even then, she had felt like an imposter, as though at any moment someone might tap her shoulder and politely ask her to leave. "Name?" asked a tuxedoed man at a table adorned with flower arrangements that probably cost more than May's monthly rent. "Mei Lin," she said, trying to sound confident. "I'm with the Community Center Fundraising Committee." The man scanned his list, his expression betraying nothing. "Ah, yes, Ms. Lin, you're at table 14. He handed her a small card with elegant calligraphy. "The ballroom is through those doors and to the left." Following his directions, May entered a room transformed into something from a dream. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like stars, casting a soft glow over tables draped in white linen and centered with arrangements of white roses and blue hydrangeas. A small orchestra played in the corner, the gentle notes of a violin filling the air. Hank waved from across the room, his usual flannel shirt replaced by a slightly outdated suit that hung loosely on his frame. Beside him stood Rosa and a few other regular volunteers, all looking as out of place as May felt. "You made it," Hank said warmly as she approached. "Quite something, isn't it? Never thought I'd see the day when our little center would have an event at the Grand." "It's beautiful," May agreed, taking a glass of water from a passing server. "Have many people donated yet?" Rosa shook her head. "The wealthy folks are just starting to arrive. The mayor promised to come and a few city council members. Victoria Powell is supposed to be here too." May's stomach tightened at the mention of Victoria. Everyone in Pinecrest knew the Powell family. They owned half the commercial real estate in town and weren't shy about flexing their influence. Victoria sat on numerous boards and committees, always photographed in designer clothes with her perfect smile. She was also, according to rumor, one of the driving forces behind the push to redevelop the community center area. "Remember, we just need to share our stories," May said, as much to herself as to the others. "Help them understand why the center matters." As the ballroom filled, the social divisions became increasingly apparent. On one side gathered the community center supporters, teachers, small business owners, families who used the center's services. On the other, Pinecrest elite circled like exotic birds, air-kissing and laughing over inside jokes, their jewelry catching the light with every gesture. May tried to mingle, approaching donors with a practiced speech about the center's impact. Some listened politely before making non-committal promises to consider supporting the cause. Others barely masked their disinterest, eyes already scanning the room for more important conversation partners. "And what exactly do you do at this community center?" asked an older woman dripping in pearls after May had introduced herself. "I run the after-school homework program," May explained. "We provide academic support for children whose parents work late shifts or multiple jobs." "How charitable," the woman replied in a tone that suggested charity was a quaint but ultimately pointless endeavor. "I suppose someone has to do these things." Before May could respond, a ripple of attention moved through the crowd. Victoria Powell had arrived, resplendent in a red designer gown that probably cost more than May's yearly salary. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. "Mrs. Whitmore," Victoria called out, spotting the pearl-laden woman. "So lovely to see you." "I've been meaning to call about the hospital wing dedication." May stepped back, suddenly invisible. She retreated toward her assigned table where Hank was already seated with a resigned expression. "Not going well?" she asked quietly. He sighed. They're being polite, but I don't think their checkbooks are coming out tonight. We're just too different from them. A microphone squealed briefly, and the hotel manager welcomed everyone to the event. He spoke briefly about community spirit and the hotel's commitment to Pinecrest before introducing the mayor, who delivered a speech so carefully neutral that it managed to say absolutely nothing of substance about the community center's future. Then it was Hank's turn to speak. May gave him an encouraging nod as he made his way to the small podium, note cards clutched in his weathered hands. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort. "I'm Henry Wilson, director of the Pinecrest Community Center. For 30 years, our center has served as a second home to thousands of families." May watched with pride as Hank spoke from the heart about the center's programs, about seniors who found companionship there, children who found safety, families who found support. His words weren't polished, but they were genuine, and she hoped the audience could feel that. When he finished, there was polite applause and the orchestra resumed playing. Dinner would be served soon, followed by the official request for donations. Mia excused herself to visit the restroom, needing a moment alone to gather her thoughts. The ladies' room was as opulent as the rest of the hotel, with marble sinks and fresh flowers on the counter. May was washing her hands when the door swung open and Victoria Powell entered with 2 other women, deep in conversation. "Can you believe that old man's speech?" Victoria was saying, her voice carrying in the tiled space. "So emotional about that rundown building, as if it's not a complete eyesore bringing down property values." May froze, hands still under the water. "And did you see the clothes on that group?" One of Victoria's friends added with a laugh. "That one woman in the navy dress looks like she's wearing something from a discount store." Victoria's eyes found May's in the mirror, a flash of recognition crossing her face before her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Rather than being embarrassed at being overheard, she seemed amused. "Oh, you're one of the community center people, aren't you?" Victoria said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "The kindergarten teacher, right?" May straightened her shoulders. "Yes, May Lynn. I believe we met briefly at a school board meeting last year." Victoria made a vague gesture, clearly not remembering or caring. "Of course. Well, it's interesting that you all decided to hold your fundraiser here. Ambitious." The word sounded like an insult in her mouth. "The center matters to a lot of people," May said quietly. "We thought it was important to share that with the whole community." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. Community. Such a nice word. But let's be honest. There are different communities in Pinecrest, aren't there? And some are simply more valuable than others. May felt heat rising in her cheeks but kept her voice level. Value isn't always measured in dollars. Victoria's friends exchanged glances, clearly enjoying the entertainment. Victoria herself stepped closer, the scent of expensive perfume surrounding May like a cloud. How adorable. "But in the real world, my dear, everything has a price tag, and your little center simply isn't worth what that land could be." She adjusted a diamond bracelet. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we should get back to our tables. I believe they're about to serve the entrees, and I'd hate to miss the Wagyu." May stood rooted to the spot as the women swept out, their laughter echoing behind them. Her hands were shaking slightly as she dried them on a plush towel. The encounter had left her feeling small and foolish, but also quietly angry. By the time she returned to the ballroom, the servers were indeed delivering the main course. May slipped into her seat, hoping her absence hadn't been noticed, but the flushed feeling on her cheeks must have given something away. "You okay?" Rosa whispered. "Fine," May lied, picking up her fork without appetite. She had just taken a bite when a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Victoria was standing from her table, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I'm sorry, but I simply must say something," she announced, gesturing for a microphone. Someone obliged, and she stood in a pool of light, commanding the room's attention with practiced ease. "I think we all know why we're really here tonight," Victoria began, her smile razor-sharp. "We're being asked to preserve a facility that, quite frankly, has outlived its usefulness in a rapidly developing town like Pinecrest." Hank half rose from his seat, but May placed a hand on his arm, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. "While I admire the enthusiasm of our community center friends," Victoria continued, her gaze fixing deliberately on May, "I think it's time for some hard truths. That building is standing in the way of progress that would benefit all of Pinecrest. New development, higher property values, better tax revenue. She paused, taking a sip of champagne. And let's be honest, some people simply don't belong in certain places. Just as that shabby center doesn't belong on what could be prime real estate, perhaps some of its advocates don't belong at an event like this. Her eyes never left May's face as she delivered the final blow. People who matter in this town understand how things work. The rest are just taking up space. The silence that followed was deafening. May felt every eye in the room turn toward her table, heard the whispers starting like a gathering storm. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as Victoria's meaning became unmistakably clear to everyone present. She had just been very publicly put in her place. The room seemed to shrink around May, air suddenly too thick to breathe. Victoria's words hung in the air like poison, and the weight of 100 stares pressed down on her shoulders. She wanted nothing more than to disappear, to melt into the floor or somehow rewind time to before she had ever thought of this fundraiser. Perhaps, Victoria continued, clearly enjoying her moment of power, we should focus tonight on real solutions for Pinecrest's future, not outdated sentimentality about a building that frankly should have been condemned years ago. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the wealthy side of the room. Others shifted in their seats, looking anywhere but at May and her colleagues. Rosa reached under the table and squeezed May's hand. "Don't let her see you cry," she whispered fiercely. "That's what she wants." May nodded, blinking rapidly. She wouldn't give Victoria that satisfaction, even as her throat closed up and her chest tightened with the effort of holding back tears. She had faced hardships before. Her father's early death, her mother's illness, the constant struggle to make ends meet. This was just words, just one awful woman's opinion. But somehow having it laid bare in public, having her worst fears confirmed, that she didn't belong, that people like her were invisible or worse, unwelcome in spaces like this, cut deeper than she had expected. Victoria was still speaking, her voice dripping with false concern. "I think we can all agree that while charity is admirable, we need to be realistic about, excuse me." A new voice cut through the room, male, deep, and carrying an unmistakable note of authority. All heads turned toward the entrance of the ballroom. Standing there was a man May had never seen before. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples, he wore a simple but impeccably tailored dark suit that somehow made everyone else in the room look overdressed. His face was striking rather than handsome, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I believe I'm interrupting," he said, walking forward with unhurried confidence. "My apologies for being late." Victoria's smile faltered slightly before returning, wider and more brilliant than before. "Not at all. We were just discussing—" "I heard what you were discussing, Miss Powell." His tone was pleasant but firm. "I've been standing at the back for the past few minutes." He continued his steady advance into the room, and people instinctively moved aside, creating a path. There was something about him, not just wealth or power, though he clearly possessed both, but a kind of centered gravity that commanded attention without demanding it. "For those who don't know me," he continued, coming to a stop in the center of the room, "my name is Daniel Chen. I recently purchased the old Harrison property on the North Cliff." A murmur swept through the room. The Harrison estate was the largest private residence in Pinecrest, a sprawling property that had been on the market for years with an asking price so astronomical that it had become something of a local legend. Victoria recovered quickly. "Mr. Chen, we've all been wondering who the mysterious buyer was. What a delight to have you join us tonight. I'm sure everyone would love to hear about your plans for the property." Daniel Chen smiled slightly, but his eyes remained serious. "Perhaps another time. Right now I'm more interested in hearing Ms. Lin finish telling us about the community center's programs." Every head swiveled toward May, who felt the blood drain from her face. How did he know her name? I didn't actually get a chance to speak yet," she managed to say, her voice mercifully steady. "Then perhaps now would be a good time," he suggested, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "If that's all right with you." It wasn't really a question, despite his polite phrasing. Somehow in the span of moments he had taken control of the room from Victoria, who now stood with the microphone hanging at her side. Her perfect features arranged in a mask of pleasantness that didn't quite hide her confusion and annoyance. Before May could respond, a hotel staff member appeared at her elbow with another microphone. Taking it with slightly trembling hands, she rose to her feet. She had prepared notes for a possible speech, but they remained untouched in her purse. Instead, she looked across the sea of faces until she found his, calm, attentive, somehow encouraging, though his expression hardly changed. "The Pinecrest Community Center isn't just a building," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's a lifeline, for the senior who has nowhere else to go during the day, for the child who needs a safe place after school while their parent works a second job, for the family that needs the food pantry to make it through the month." She took a deep breath and continued, no longer seeing the judging eyes or designer clothes, but the faces of people she helped every day. "We don't just provide services, we provide dignity. We provide community. And yes, we provide hope. Not everyone in Pinecrest lives in a beautiful home or drives an expensive car. Some of us are just trying to get by, to give our children a better chance, to care for our aging parents, to feel like we belong somewhere." Her gaze shifted to Victoria. "And no, we don't all matter in the same way to the economic future of this town, but we should matter as human beings. The measure of a community isn't in its property values or tax revenue. It's in how it treats its most vulnerable members." The silence when she finished was different from before. Not the uncomfortable quiet of collective embarrassment, but something more thoughtful. She couldn't tell if her words had reached anyone, but at least she had spoken her truth. "Thank you, Ms. Lin," Daniel Chen said into the quiet. That was eloquent and heartfelt. He turned to address the room. "I came to Pinecrest looking for a place to put down roots after many years of constant travel. What interested me wasn't just the natural beauty or investment opportunities, but the character of the community." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Over the past month, I've been quietly visiting different parts of town, observing, listening. And do you know where I consistently found the most genuine welcome, the most meaningful connections? At the community center that Ms. Lin and her colleagues are trying to save." Victoria stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, while these sentiments are touching, the economic realities, I'm quite familiar with economic realities, Ms. Powell." He interrupted smoothly. "My company specializes in them." Another murmur went through the crowd. A few people pulled out their phones, presumably searching his name. May saw eyes widening, people leaning to whisper to their neighbors. "In fact," Daniel continued, "I've been considering a significant investment in Pinecrest, something that would create jobs, improve infrastructure, and yes, increase those property values you're concerned about." Victoria's smile returned full force. "That's wonderful news. The development group would be thrilled to discuss. I'm not interested in luxury condos or high-end retail, Ms. Powell." His voice had cooled several degrees. "I'm interested in sustainable community development that benefits everyone. And based on what I've seen in this room tonight, I'm reconsidering whether Pinecrest is the right fit after all." The mayor, who had been watching from the sidelines, suddenly found his voice. "Mr. Chen, I assure you that what you witnessed doesn't represent the values of our town. We're a welcoming community that—" "Show, don't tell, Mayor Richards." Daniel's interruption was gentle but firm. "Actions speak louder than reassurances." He turned back to May, and for the first time his serious expression softened slightly. "Ms. Lin, I believe we met briefly last week, though you wouldn't remember. I was observing the after-school program and you helped a young boy with his math homework. He was frustrated, on the verge of giving up, but you showed remarkable patience. You told him something I've remembered. It's not about being perfect, it's about not giving up when things get hard." May blinked in surprise. She vaguely recalled a visitor, someone Hank had introduced as a potential donor. But in the busy chaos of homework club, she'd barely registered his presence. "That philosophy," Daniel continued, "seems to apply to more than just math homework. It applies to communities as well." He returned his attention to the room at large. I came here tonight planning to make a donation to the community center. After what I've witnessed, I'm prepared to do more. I'd like to propose a matching grant. For every dollar raised tonight, I will contribute $5 up to a total of $1 million. The room erupted in astonished whispers. $1 million was more than enough to save the center, renovate it, and fund its programs for years to come. Additionally, he continued when the noise subsided, I'd like to discuss establishing an educational foundation in Pinecrest, focused on providing resources to underserved youth. Ms. Lin, given your evident passion and experience, I'd be interested in your input on how such a foundation might best serve the community. May stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This stranger had not only defended her, but was now offering to save everything she had been fighting for. It seemed impossible, like something from a movie rather than real life. Daniel Chen glanced at his watch. Now I believe dinner is getting cold and I've taken up enough of everyone's time. Please continue enjoying your evening. With that, he stepped back, leaving the center of attention as smoothly as he had claimed it. The orchestra, sensing a cue, began to play again, and the spell that had held the room captive slowly dissolved into a buzz of conversation. Victoria Powell, May noticed, had disappeared entirely. As people returned to their meals and the shocked discussion of what had just occurred, Daniel Chen made his way through the crowd toward May's table. Up close, he seemed more human. There were faint lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled more often in private than in public, and a tiredness beneath his composure that spoke of long hours and heavy responsibilities. Ms. Lin, he said quietly when he reached her, I hope I didn't overstep. It seemed like the conversation needed redirecting. Thank you, May managed, still processing everything that had happened. But why? You don't even know us. Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. Let's just say I recognize the look of someone being made to feel they don't belong. It's not a feeling anyone should have to endure in silence. Before she could respond, they were surrounded by people eager to introduce themselves to Daniel Chen. The mayor, city council members, business owners who had ignored May all evening, but now looked at her with new interest. In the midst of the sudden attention, May caught Daniel's eye once more. He gave her the smallest of nods, a gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and reassurance. Whatever his reasons, whatever came next, something had shifted tonight, not just for the community center, but for May herself. For the first time since Victoria had singled her out for humiliation, she took a full, deep breath. The future, which had seemed so bleak just minutes ago, now held possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The morning after the gala, May woke to her phone buzzing incessantly. She had silenced it the night before, overwhelmed by the sudden attention and needing time to process everything that had happened. Now, squinting at the screen, she saw dozens of missed calls, texts, and notifications. Local news outlets wanted statements. The mayor's office had called 3 times. Even the principal of her school had messaged, asking if she would be coming in today or needed time off, given the circumstances. May sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her temples. Last night still felt like a dream, or perhaps a movie scene where she had somehow wandered onto the set. Daniel Chen's intervention, his surprising $1 million pledge, the way the room had transformed from a site of her humiliation to a place where people suddenly wanted to shake her hand. May, are you awake? Her mother's voice called from down the hall, followed by a fit of coughing. Reality rushed back. No matter what had happened last night, her responsibilities remained the same. Her mother needed her medicine, her students were expecting her, and despite Daniel Chen's generous offer, nothing had actually changed yet. The community center still faced closure unless the donation was finalized, and she still had bills to pay. Coming, Mom, she called back, pushing aside her tangled thoughts. There would be time to make sense of everything later. After helping her mother with breakfast and medication, May dressed for work, opting for her usual modest attire. If people were going to talk about her today, and they surely would, at least she would face it as herself, not trying to be someone she wasn't. As she walked to school, she noticed people watching her, some nodding and greeting who had never acknowledged her before. Outside the coffee shop, a woman she recognized as a regular customer stopped her. "You're the teacher from the news, right?" she asked, smiling warmly. "The one from the community center?" I just wanted to say good for you. Standing up to Victoria Powell. That woman has needed someone to put her in her place for years. Oh, I didn't really, May began, but the woman was already continuing. And that billionaire. Wow, is it true he's going to donate $1 million? The whole town's talking about it. May managed a small smile. It seems that way. Nothing's finalized yet, though. Well, it's about time someone with money actually used it for something good around here. You let us know if there's anything regular folks can do to help, okay? Throughout the day, similar interactions followed. Students' parents lingered at drop-off to congratulate her. Fellow teachers stopped by her classroom during breaks, curious about Daniel Chen and what he was really like. By lunchtime, May had grown weary of explaining that she barely knew the man, that their conversation had lasted all of 2 minutes before they were surrounded by others. You're a celebrity now, teased Gabriella, the second-grade teacher, as they ate lunch together. How does it feel? Honestly? Uncomfortable, May admitted. I didn't do anything special. Mr. Chen is the one who saved the day. That's not how I heard it, Gabriella replied. People are saying your speech moved him to action, that you stood up to Victoria Powell with such dignity that he couldn't help but be impressed. May nearly choked on her sandwich. That's not what happened at all. I was terrified. If he hadn't interrupted when he did, I probably would have run out of the room in tears. But you didn't, Gabriella pointed out. You stood your ground and spoke from the heart. Don't sell yourself short, May. After school, May made her way to the community center, bracing herself for more of the same. Sure enough, the normally quiet building was buzzing with activity. Local reporters hovered outside, and the main room was packed with people May had never seen before, all claiming to be longtime supporters of the center's mission. Hank pulled her into his office as soon as she arrived, closing the door against the noise. It's been like this all day, he said, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. Phones ringing off the hook, people dropping by with checks, reporters wanting interviews. It's madness. Has there been any word from Mr. Chen? May asked, setting down her bag. About the donation? Hank grinned. Better than that. His lawyer dropped by this morning with preliminary paperwork for the matching grant. It's real, May. He's really going to do it. Relief washed over her. That's wonderful news. There's more, Hank said, leaning forward. He wants to meet with you. Specifically you, not me or the board. His assistant called to set it up. Tomorrow at 10 at his house. That big place on the cliff, May blinked in surprise. Me, why? Remember what he said about an educational foundation? I think he was serious about wanting your input. Hank rubbed his chin thoughtfully. This could be huge for the center, May, for the whole town, really. I don't know anything about foundations or large-scale philanthropy, she protested. Surely there are people better qualified. He asked for you, Hank interrupted gently. And after what I saw last night, I think he's a man who knows exactly what he's doing. That evening, after checking on her mother, May did something she rarely allowed herself. She opened her laptop and researched Daniel Chen. What she found made her even more bewildered by his interest in her opinion. Daniel Chen, 45, was the founder and CEO of Phoenix Innovations, a technology company that had started in artificial intelligence before expanding into renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and educational technology. His personal fortune was estimated at over $7 billion, making him one of the wealthiest people in the country. Yet despite his success, he kept a remarkably low profile, rarely giving interviews and avoiding the flashy lifestyle typical of the ultra-wealthy. Most interesting to May, however, was his background. Unlike many tech billionaires, Daniel Chen hadn't come from privilege. The son of Chinese immigrants, he had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, attended public schools, and earned scholarships to college. His first business had failed spectacularly, leaving him briefly homeless before he founded the company that would eventually make him wealthy beyond imagination. There were few personal details available, no mention of a wife or family, no scandals or controversies, just occasional references to his philanthropic work, which was substantial but typically anonymous. The most recent news about him, prior to last night's events, was his purchase of the Harrison estate 3 months ago, which had set local real estate records. May closed her laptop, feeling no closer to understanding why such a man would take an interest in her or the community center. Perhaps it was simply as he'd said. He recognized someone being made to feel they didn't belong. But that hardly explained why he would want her input on an educational foundation when he could hire experts with advanced degrees and years of experience. The next morning, May dressed with care in her most professional outfit, a simple gray skirt and blue blouse she normally reserved for parent-teacher conferences. After arranging for a neighbor to check on her mother, she began the long walk to the north side of town, where the wealthiest residents lived in sprawling homes overlooking the ocean. The Harrison estate, now the Chen estate, she supposed was the most impressive of them all, set back from the road behind wrought iron gates. As she approached, May half expected to be turned away, to discover the whole thing had been some elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, the gates swung open as she neared them, and a voice from a hidden speaker welcomed her by name. The gay driveway wound through beautifully, landscaped grounds before opening to reveal the house, itself a modern structure of glass and stone that seemed to grow naturally from the cliff edge. It was impressive without being ostentatious, more architectural masterpiece than display of wealth. A woman in a simple black suit met her at the door. "Ms. Lin? I'm Rita, Mr. Chen's assistant. He's expecting you in the study. This way, please." May followed her through the house, trying not to gawk at the soaring ceilings, the walls of glass that framed spectacular ocean views, the carefully selected artwork that spoke of genuine appreciation rather than status-seeking. Everything was beautiful but understated, nothing flashy or gilded. Rita led her to a warm, wood-paneled room lined with bookshelves. Unlike the rest of the house, which felt like it could be featured in an architectural magazine, this space felt lived in, with books piled on side tables, a half-empty coffee mug on a coaster, a tablet with handwritten notes beside it. "Mr. Chen will be with you shortly," Rita said. "Can I get you anything while you wait? Coffee, tea?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you," May replied, too nervous to refuse. Left alone, she wandered to the bookshelves, curious about what a billionaire might read. She found an eclectic mix, technical manuals and business books, yes, but also poetry, philosophy, biographies, and to her surprise, a well-worn copy of her favorite novel. She was examining it when a voice spoke from behind her. "The protagonist reminds me of you, a bit." May turned to find Daniel Chen standing in the doorway, dressed more casually than at the gala in dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Without the formal suit, he looked younger, though the intensity of his gaze remained the same. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snoop," she said quickly, returning the book to its shelf. He smiled, the expression warming his serious face. "It's not snooping if they're out in the open. Besides, you can tell a lot about a person from their books." May nodded, thinking of her own small collection at home, mostly second-hand paperbacks and books on early childhood education, carefully preserved and treasured. "Please sit," Daniel said, gesturing to a pair of comfortable leather chairs by the window. "Rita will bring your tea momentarily." Once they were seated, an awkward silence fell. May found herself struggling to reconcile the powerful figure who had commanded the ballroom with this quiet man, watching her with patient interest. "I should thank you," she finally said, "for what you did last night. It was extraordinary." "It was the right thing to do," he replied simply. Victoria Powell's behavior was unacceptable. Still, $1 million donation is far beyond the right thing. It's life-changing for our center. May hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why, you don't know us." "You don't owe Pinecrest anything." Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking out at the ocean. "When I was 12, he finally said, my family moved to a new town much like this one. My father had lost his job at the factory where he'd worked for 15 years, and we had to go where he could find work. I was the only Asian kid in my school, wearing second-hand clothes, barely speaking English." He turned back to May, his expression open in a way it hadn't been at the gala. "There was a fundraiser at the school. Nothing as fancy as last night, just a potluck dinner to raise money for new playground equipment. My mother made her specialty, Chinese dumplings. She stayed up all night making them, wanting to contribute something special." Rita entered with a tea tray, pausing the story. After she left, Daniel continued, his voice softer. "When we arrived, the popular kids and their parents were at one table. A woman, the PTA president, much like Victoria in manner, made a big show of asking what was in the dumplings, if they were sanitary, suggesting they might not be appropriate for the event. My mother, who spoke little English, didn't understand everything being said, but she understood the tone, the looks. She understood we weren't welcome." May felt a pang of recognition. What happened? We left. My mother threw away the dumplings when we got home. She never came to another school event. He took a sip of his own tea. I promised myself that if I ever had the power to prevent someone else from feeling that way, I would use it. So last night was personal, yes. Daniel set down his cup. But it's more than that. When I came to Pinecrest, I was looking for a place that values community, that takes care of its own. The community center, and more specifically, people like you who pour their hearts into it, that's the Pinecrest I want to invest in. Not Victoria Powell's vision of luxury condos and exclusive boutiques. May nodded slowly, beginning to understand. But why me? For this foundation you mentioned? I'm just a kindergarten teacher. Who better? Daniel asked, leaning forward. You understand what children in this community need. You see their struggles and potential firsthand. Experts and consultants have their place, but real change happens when people with lived experience have a voice. For the first time since entering his home, May felt her nervousness fade, replaced by cautious hope. Perhaps this wasn't charity or pity. Perhaps he truly saw value in her perspective. I'd like to hear your thoughts, Daniel said. If you had the resources to create educational opportunities for underserved children in Pinecrest, what would you prioritize? As May began to speak, sharing ideas she had long held but never voiced, she realized that the greatest gift Daniel Chen had given her wasn't the donation or the defense against Victoria's cruelty. It was being truly seen and heard, perhaps for the first time. 6 months had passed since the night of the gala, and Pinecrest had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The old community center building still stood, but it was hardly recognizable, renovated, expanded, and humming with more activity than ever before. On this bright spring morning, May stood just inside the entrance, watching as workers installed the new sign above the doors, Pinecrest Community Learning Center. The name had been chosen by a vote among the center's regular users, reflecting its evolved mission as both a social service hub and an educational resource. What do you think? Asked Rita, Daniel's assistant, who had become a familiar face around the center over the past months. Does it capture the spirit of the place? May nodded, feeling a swell of pride. It's perfect. A place of learning, but still a community at heart. The journey to this moment had been anything but smooth. After that first meeting at Daniel's home, they had spent weeks developing plans for what would become the Chen Educational Initiative. Daniel had insisted that May take the lead in designing programs, despite her initial doubts about her qualifications. Experience matters more than degrees in this case, he had told her firmly. You know these children, these families. You understand their needs in a way no consultant ever could. Slowly, May had come to believe him, or at least to trust that he believed in her. Together, they had created a vision that went far beyond saving the old building. The renovated center would house not just the existing programs, but also a state-of-the-art early learning center, STEM labs for older students, adult education classes, and a comprehensive family support system including healthcare navigation, job training, and financial literacy. Not everyone had been supportive. Victoria Powell and her allies had fought the expansion, citing concerns about traffic, property values, and changing the character of the neighborhood. But with Daniel's resources behind them and growing community support, the opposition had eventually been overruled. Ms. Lin, a young man approached, clipboard in hand. The caterers need to know where to set up for tomorrow's grand opening. In the main hall, please, May replied. And make sure they know we're expecting about 300 people. 300 people. The number still amazed her. When they had first announced the grand opening celebration, she had worried about filling the space. Instead, they had received RSVPs from across the community, families who used the center, local business owners, school officials, and even the mayor and city council members, who had suddenly discovered their enthusiastic support for community services. Victoria Powell would not be among the attendees. 3 months after the gala, news had broken that the Powell family's real estate empire was built on fraudulent practices and tax evasion. Victoria herself had quietly left town, reportedly moving to Europe while her family's legal troubles unfolded. May couldn't help but feel a touch of sympathy beneath her satisfaction. She knew what it was like to have your world upended, to face an uncertain future. The difference was that she had never had very far to fall. While Victoria had lost everything she valued, wealth, status, and the power to make others feel small. "Earth to May," came an amused voice, pulling her from her thoughts. "Where did you go just now?" Daniel stood beside her, casual in jeans and a light sweater, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him in those early days. Over the months of working closely together, his formal reserve had gradually softened, revealing a dry sense of humor and a thoughtfulness that went beyond mere philanthropy. "Just thinking about everything that's changed," she admitted. "It's hard to believe sometimes." He nodded, his gaze taking in the bustling activity around them. "Change can happen quickly when the right people come together." "You've done remarkable work here, May." "We've done remarkable work," she corrected him. "None of this would exist without you." "The building wouldn't," he acknowledged. "But the heart of it, the vision, that was always here. In you and Hank and everyone who kept this place going when no one else cared." They walked together through the center, checking on last-minute preparations for the grand opening. In the early learning classroom, teachers were arranging materials on low shelves. The computer lab hummed with the sound of new equipment being tested. In the senior lounge, volunteers hung artwork created by local students. "Your mother seems to be enjoying the art class," Daniel observed as they passed a vibrant watercolor signed by Lin Wei Ling. May smiled at the mention of her mother. One of the first programs they had implemented was an adaptive arts program for seniors and those with health challenges. To May's surprise, her mother, who had rarely left the house during her illness, had become one of its most enthusiastic participants. "She's thriving," May agreed. "The doctors can't believe how much her mobility has improved. She says having somewhere to go each day gives her a reason to keep trying. Sometimes purpose is the best medicine," Daniel said quietly. They ended their tour on the center's new rooftop garden, a space designed for both education and relaxation. Raised beds filled with vegetables and herbs would serve the culinary classes, while benches nestled among flowering plants offered peaceful spots for reading or conversation. From this height, they could see much of Pinecrest spread below them, the downtown area with its mix of shops and restaurants, the schools where May had taught, the modest neighborhoods where many of the center's users lived, and in the distance, the glittering ocean that had first drawn Daniel to this coastal town. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Daniel said as they leaned against the railing, enjoying the view and the gentle breeze. "The new educational director position. Have you considered applying?" May hesitated. The position had been her idea. Someone to oversee all the educational programs at the center, to ensure they worked together coherently and met the community's evolving needs. It was a far cry from teaching kindergarten, with significantly more responsibility and a salary that would solve many of her financial worries. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but I'm not sure I'm qualified. The job description mentions advanced degrees, administrative experience." "Experience can be more valuable than credentials," Daniel said, echoing his earlier sentiments. "You designed most of these programs. You understand how they're meant to work together. And most importantly, you have the trust of the community. People might think I got the job because of our friendship," May said carefully. Over the months of working together, she and Daniel had developed a relationship that defied easy categorization. Colleagues, certainly. Friends increasingly. And sometimes, in quiet moments like this, something that felt like it might become more, given time. Daniel turned to face her fully. "Anyone who thinks that doesn't know you very well. You've earned every opportunity that's come your way, May, including my respect." The sincerity in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze directly. What she saw there gave her courage. "All right," she said. "I'll apply." His smile was warm. "Good. The selection committee would be foolish not to choose you, but the process will be fair. I've recused myself from the final decision precisely to avoid any appearance of favoritism." "Always thinking ahead," May teased, growing more comfortable with their evolving dynamic. "I try," he replied. "Speaking of which, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. A new project I'm considering." Before he could continue, Rita appeared at the rooftop entrance. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but the mayor's office is on the phone. They want to confirm some details about tomorrow's ceremony." Daniel nodded. "We'll finish this conversation later," he promised May. "Perhaps dinner after the opening tomorrow? There's a small restaurant on the pier I've been wanting to try." "I'd like that," May replied, surprised by her own lack of hesitation. As Daniel followed Rita back inside, Mia remained on the rooftop, taking a moment to absorb everything around her. 6 months ago, she had been a kindergarten teacher struggling to make ends meet, fighting what seemed like a hopeless battle to save a run-down community center. Now she stood atop that same center, transformed, expanded, secure, considering a career leap she never would have imagined possible. Yet through all the external changes, she remained fundamentally herself. Her values hadn't shifted with her circumstances. She still woke each morning with the same purpose: to make a difference in her community, to create spaces where everyone belonged. The grand opening ceremony the next day exceeded all expectations. The renovated center gleamed in the spring sunshine as hundreds of community members gathered to celebrate. Children raced through the new playgrounds, seniors explored the art studios, and parents marveled at the learning resources now available to their families. May stood to the side of the makeshift stage, listening as Hank welcomed everyone with the enthusiasm that even retirement planning couldn't diminish. He would be stepping down as director next month, though he promised to remain involved as a volunteer. And now, Hank announced, "I'd like to invite the person who made all this possible to say a few words, Mr. Daniel Chen." Applause greeted Daniel as he approached the microphone. He looked perfectly at ease, though May knew from their conversations that he disliked public speaking and avoided it when possible. "Thank you," he began. "But Mr. Wilson has it backward. I didn't make this possible. The people of Pinecrest did. Everyone who volunteered, who fought for this center when it was threatened, who believed in its value even when others couldn't see it." His gaze found May in the crowd, his expression softening momentarily before he continued. "What I've learned in my time here is that true communities aren't built by developers or defined by property values. They're created by people who show up for each other day after day, who see the humanity in their neighbors regardless of circumstances." He paused, looking out over the gathered crowd. "I came to Pinecrest looking for a place to belong after years of feeling like a perpetual outsider. What I found here, thanks to remarkable people like Mei Lin, was not just a community willing to accept me, but one worth investing in, worth fighting for." After the ceremony, as attendees explored the new facilities, May found herself surrounded by well-wishers, former students and their parents, colleagues from the school. Center volunteers all wanted to share in the celebration, to tell her how proud they were of what she had accomplished. "You deserve every bit of this," Gabriella told her, pulling her into a quick hug. "And from what I hear, you might be getting a fancy new job title to go with it." May laughed. "Nothing's decided yet, and even if it is, I'll still be the same person." "Of course you will," Gabriella agreed. "That's why we all love you." As the crowd began to thin in late afternoon, May found Daniel waiting near the entrance, car keys in hand. "Ready for that dinner?" he asked. "I think we've both earned a quiet moment after today." The restaurant he had chosen was indeed small and quiet, a family-owned place overlooking the harbor where fishing boats gently rocked on the evening tide. Over plates of fresh seafood, they talked not about the center or educational programs, but about books they had loved as children, places they hoped to visit someday, small dreams they had set aside during busier times. "You mentioned a new project yesterday," May remembered as they shared a dessert. Before Rita interrupted us, Daniel nodded, setting down his fork. "Yes, I've been thinking about expanding the educational initiative beyond Pinecrest, creating a model that could be adapted for other communities facing similar challenges." "That sounds wonderful," May said sincerely. "The impact could be tremendous. It would require a lot of travel initially," he continued. "Visiting potential sites, meeting with local leaders, building partnerships. I'd need someone who truly understands the vision to help lead the project." May felt a flutter of understanding. "Are you offering me a job?" "Potentially," he admitted. "If you're interested. Though I understand if you'd prefer to stay focused on Pinecrest, especially if you become the new educational director." May considered his words carefully. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine leaving Pinecrest. It was my whole world. But now? He prompted gently when she trailed off. "Now I'm starting to see that there's a bigger world out there, that maybe what we've built here could help other communities too." She met his gaze across the table. "I'd need to think about it, but yes, I might be very interested." The smile that spread across his face was genuine and unguarded. "Take all the time you need. The project is still in the planning stages." As they walked along the pier after dinner, the setting sun painting the water in shades of gold and pink, May felt a profound sense of contentment. Her life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, yet the change felt organic, like growth rather than disruption. "Thank you," she said suddenly, stopping to face Daniel, not just for the center or the opportunities, but for seeing me, really seeing me when I felt invisible. Daniel took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "May, you were never invisible. You just needed someone to hold up a mirror so you could see what was always there. Your strength, your compassion, your unwavering conviction. All I did was reflect back what already existed." In that moment, with the sun setting on one chapter of her life and the promise of a new one on the horizon, May finally understood the truth. The simple kindergarten teacher and the billionaire weren't as different as the world might think. Both had known what it meant to be outsiders, to fight for belonging, to build something meaningful from nothing. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that dignity wasn't determined by wealth or status, but by how we treat each other, especially in our most vulnerable moments. That true worth wasn't measured in dollars but in impact, in lives touched, in communities strengthened. As they turned to walk back along the pier, hand in hand, May knew that whatever came next, whether she stayed in Pinecrest or traveled the world helping other communities, whether her relationship with Daniel blossomed into something deeper or remained a profound friendship, she would never again doubt her place in the world or the value of her voice. Some journeys begin with a single step. Hers had begun with a moment of cruel humiliation transformed by unexpected kindness. And now, with each new day, it continued, not as a simple woman rescued by a billionaire, but as two people who had recognized in each other the same fundamental truth, that everyone deserves to be seen, to belong, to stand tall in their own worth.